order. Roll call, please.
Anchor?
Yes.
Meek?
Yes.
Keo?
Yes.
Steingraber?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes. I'd like to welcome our two visitors, Tom and Mike, from the City Council. Appreciate having you here. This is going to be open discussion on, in fact, I was expecting Jennifer to be here too, maybe Steve Bart, but might be something else going on right now.
Mike, do you want to take the two faster items right now?
Sure, we can do that, get those out of the way. Item number 5 is approval of budget resolution 12.2022. Chief.
Yeah, so this, basically, our foam wagons had, let's see here. 1,100 gallons of Class B foam that was produced, I guess during the PFAS age, if you will. So that foam needed to be replaced under this new state $1 million grant. We were fortunate enough to get involved in that. The state is buying back all of our foam. So this is in relation to that project. And just FYI, it would have cost about $60,000 to $70,000 for us to incinerate all of our foam if we had done this a few years ago. But again, all this is falling underneath this grant. The foam wagons in particular were initially purchased by Marshfield Utilities to protect their M1 plant. They have two 75,000 gallon diesel tanks out there. We didn't have the foam or the equipment to protect those. So they bought the trailers, bought the foam initially. It was depreciated out through the city, and eventually the city owning that foam in those trailers. Therefore, all that Class B foam with the PFAS in it became our problem. Like I said, we're able to get underneath that $1 million grant from the state. They are going to take care of that for free. So our talks turned to replacement of that Class B foam to protect their diesel tanks out on 34th. We did find a PFAS-free foam. There are several on the market. Not all of them were individually tested. This one that we found had been individually tested at the Madison Fire Department, and it is truly PFAS-free. Some of the other PFAS-free foams out there did have some trace amounts of PFAS. We wanted to make sure we're doing everything with that. We did speak with Marshfield Utilities about replacement of the foam. They agreed to pay for the 4 275-gallon totes of foam, as well as to decontaminate the one foam wagon that did have foam in the system. That was approved at the November 14th, 2022 Marshfield Utilities Commission meeting. They set up funds to replace all the foam and to decontaminate the trailer in an amount not to exceed $53,000. That motion passed unanimously. So what this resolution is asking for us to do is for the department, Marshfield Fire Department, to purchase the foam, and then utilities reimburse us. So we need to move basically money back and forth, hence the budget resolution as you see before you. So we already purchased and placed the foam on the trailers as far as the 100 gallons. Yeah, so I'm just looking for approval for this budget resolution. I'll answer any questions. Yeah.
Is there a motion to that effect?
Move to approve.
Motion by Bill, second by Steve. Any questions?
No downside to any of this?
What's it?
No negative or downside to any?
No, there isn't. No.
Okay.
Roll call, please.
Anchor?
Yes.
Meek?
Yes.
Keo?
Yes.
Steingraber?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes. Thanks, Chief.
Yeah.
You can move into the next one, budget resolution 13-2022.
This one, try to model, I'm familiar with this issue, but Deputy Chief Mueller was taking care of this one. So basically with engine 2, I'll try to work my way through it. Like I said, I believe in September, we had our annual pump test, which we're required to do annually. Engine 2 did not pass its pump test. Initially, it was thought the issue was, pressure governor. So they replaced the pressure governor, went back to pump test it, and had fluctuating pressures again within the pump. Engine 2 is a little unique in the way Darley makes their pumps. It's a straight shaft through the transmission and into the pump. What happened was, it sounds like we spun a bearing and broke a bearing within the transmission. That is not a cheap replacement. It's going to cost, at minimum, $35,175. And that would be pulling out the transmission, pulling out the pump, opening it up, looking at what damage is in there, and then replacing piece by piece. Another option that Everett spelled out was get a complete pump transmission and individual pump parts for a cost of $40,500. Again, you get a new transmission out of that. However, you'd still have the old pump parts. So once they open up the pump, there may be things in there that they need to replace. So it's not a truly fixed cost at $40,535. The option DC Mueller is recommending is that that'd be option 3 in the packet, is that we get a new pump and a new transmission. That would cost approximately $45,000. That would come with a 6-year warranty on the transmission and the pump at that point. About a 14-week lead time on this. Engine 2 is already sitting in Amherst right now at Red Power Diesel. And we do have other rigs that need to be shipped out of here for minor repairs that we're going to be able to handle, but obviously we don't budget for a major defect like this one. So I guess what I'm looking for is approval of this budget resolution of $51,960, as we already have $6,800 invested in the new pressure governor and diagnostic work at this point. I'll answer any questions you have.
I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
First by Andy, second by Steve Nick. Questions? Anybody?
Engine 2 is good for another 10 years.
10 years that won't be with us. Yes.
So you're really asking for $5,000 a year for 10 years.
Correct.
And that was option 3.
Correct.
Could you do without it?
No. Engine 2 is our primary backup engine. Right now we have a total of 4 engines. 2 of them have sticks on them, ladders on top of them. 2 is meant to carry, it's kind of a replacement for engine 3 right now, as it's similar in what it does. So it carries 1,000 gallons of water on it, whereas the other 2 engines with the ladders on top carry 400 and 500 gallons, which is not a whole lot. Engine 4 right now is the secondary backup. That one has a ladder on top of it. Again, carries 500 gallons. And that one's actually a 2001 unit, so much, much older. Engine 2 is our newest backup, so that one would be tough to live without.
Okay.
I was gonna say, just to perhaps add Andy's question, we've got some areas in the city where 1,000 gallons could make the difference in the initial. Because we've got some areas where the nearest hydrant could be 1,200 or more feet from, let's see, like if you go out on Lincoln Avenue and in that section up by the viaduct.
Yeah. I just read an article. Some fire department used 40,000 gallons of water to put out the fire in Tesla.
It took like 12 hours or something like that too.
Yeah, and with our staffing issues, we need to have that much water initially as well, because there are times when we respond where there may be 2 ambulances out of the station, we respond with 5 people. We don't have a person to establish a water supply immediately, so it's very important that we begin our initial attack with that onboard water and then secondary establish that water supply.
And when you talk about pump, you're talking about a hose from a hydrant to the truck.
Nope, the pump is internal inside
Yeah.
the, yep, correct.
All right, and then a hose from the pump to fighting the
To
fire.
fight the fire, yes.
So you get enough water, its volume isn't the issue, it's pressure, and the pump provides the pressure.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there a time estimate when this could be, if this is approved, of how long we can expect to?
Yeah, I think the lead time on option 3, Deputy Chief Mueller had it in there. 14 weeks.
Okay.
Doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of choice.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Pinker,
Yes.
Meek,
Yes.
Keo,
Yes.
Steingruber,
Yes.
Myers.
Yes. Unfortunate, but we gotta do it. Okay, well, thanks for joining us. This is just, I think you probably had staff meetings already in this regard, from what I understand.
Yeah, we had one with finance and fire and EMS staff and police chief Jody and Travis Esser was with us too. It's a good conversation.
Okay, good. Then we'll just roll into a discussion. If we need any motions or anything afterwards, we can take whatever we decide to do, but this pretty much just opens it up, and I think, Steve, maybe you could just say where you've gotten to this point so far, or what the ideas are that are bouncing around.
Well, you know, I think what I want to bring to the council is 2, maybe 3 options for them to consider. I think that's sort of what they're asking for. And so we had a meeting to talk about not just the EMS and fire issue, but PD. Were there any things that Jody saw coming around the bend that they'd want to put into a referendum? My biggest thought on the referendum is 2 things. Number one, I don't want to cut ourselves short to where we turn around next year and are asking for more. I mean, if we may get the public's blessing for a referendum that will help the situation, but if we come back next year and say, well, no, that was great, now we just need to go another $300,000 higher, we're going to irritate them. So one of the things I would like to see is that we have what some communities have had, which is even if we're not asking for any more next year, that we build in this year, we have like a CPI adjustment. So that if we're asking for, let's say, $500,000 next year to cover the following things, well, to cover those same things next year, firefighter and our paramedic salaries won't be $500,000 anymore, it would be $520,000 or something, that we build that factor in, so we're not coming back to them asking for more money just for the same projects. The other thing I want though, is I want to give them options. And I think, you know, Pete and Steve will probably agree with this. I mean, the 3 firefighter paramedic option is probably short-sighted. It fills the gap that we've been talking about for a while. Is it in the best interest long-term of the operation? No. It just gets us back to where we were, which is treading water. But I think we need to show it as an option, because if we don't, I feel like Tom and Mike and their peers are gonna eat me alive. I mean, that was the whole premise, was to fill that gap. So I'm thinking maybe a 3 firefighter, 6 firefighter, 9 firefighter, different options, and what they would cost and what they would look like. What the tax impact might be on say a $200,000 home. They used to say 100,000 in the old days, but you know, that's long since gone. My question for the meeting was again, for Jody and for Pete as well, are there other things that should be folded into this? And I'll let Jody and Pete talk to themselves, obviously, but the impression I got was, at the time being, you know, probably not. We need to find a way to get this ambulance purchased, and I think we're getting hopefully closer. I haven't talked to these guys lately, but filling the gap in pieces, some of it being with ARPA money that is left over or will be left over after another project, the revaluation of city property. Hopefully we've got enough pieces together to make up that $310,000 or whatever the current figure is. You have other equipment needs. Maybe you've been baking it a little bit since we last talked. Maybe you want to bring that up. But at the time, we didn't have anything sitting there. And I get the impression from Jody and Travis that there may well be. I mean, that department has needs too, staffing and otherwise, but maybe not in 2023 at this point.
Well,
Actually, I'll stop right now because I'm just,
Yeah, I'll cut in.
go for it.
Since that, our department's a little bit later to this conversation, because we were waiting to see what the decision was gonna be with the budget for next year. And so, in looking at it, I think it's realistic to believe that with the cut we've had this year is pretty much our new baseline. Next year, we will be building off of where we are this year. And what concerns me is that with the number that's been cut, essentially that equates to, one police officer at the base rate and one record specialist, both of which are retiring this year. So my staffing is going down from, on the road, sworn officers from 40 to 39, and record specialists from 3 down to 2. I can't operate on 2 record specialists because they take care of the front lobby, and they also have to fulfill the timeliness and getting reports done so that we can prosecute the people that we arrest. They're worked. In fact, later on I'll discuss how much I believe that they're overworked, but right now they're struggling to stay on, and the amount of time that it takes to hire a record specialist, right around 6 months, it's going to be very difficult to fill that in the time that Debbie Carl retires, which she handed in her letter last Friday. So that's going to happen. So what I'm looking at now realistically is I'm looking at being down 1 officer and 1 record specialist. I feel that we need to add into the referendum to secure those 2 positions in order to move up to our baseline. And then talking with Chief Floody, he's experiencing his department's experiencing some of the issues with keeping up with the record side of the house as well, to where an additional half a record specialist could be very beneficial to help Lori, and we could use a half as well. I think it's logical to move towards maybe the police and fire sharing 1 full record specialist would be the only additional that I would request in this referendum. The rest is to actually absolutely get back to our baseline. The other things that we're looking at, obviously we're gonna have talks with the school. I'm hoping that those go favorably, where, there's other areas where we may be able to help out, but in this referendum, my thought right now is we need to try to see if the city can bring us back to a baseline.
Well, and this goes to another point too. I think that there are other communities, we talk about firefighter, paramedics, but if you look at the referendums that have gone through in other places, they have gone beyond that to include police. They've actually I've seen community service officers, effectively ordinance officers. I've seen something akin to police record specialists in 1 or 2 of them. Office people that are needed to keep those public safety operations going. So that's very possible. So here's kind of what I want, coming back to where I tried to start, which is, I think, people in the position of Tom and Mike, and I'm not going to put them on the spot, they're here just to listen, but I think would want to see maybe 3 alternatives. And I would think they would like to see with each one, what does that do for us? Okay, so I'm just picturing that the 1 baseline, and I think we can argue against it if that's the purview or the view that people have, but it's got to be just filling those 3 firefighter paramedic positions with a commitment to continuing them and having an escalating clause to have those revenues increase from year to year, whether it be CPI or some other number. But then the others, and maybe police gets thrown into that, maybe the whole idea of a record specialist shared or whatever gets thrown into that, but then you have another 1 or 2 options that talk about a more longer term vision of what we need to be productive and to be successful. And the next option might be 6 firefighter paramedics and incorporate 1 or 2 other elements. Something that's going to do our needs, not just for 23 and 24, well, 24 because this referendum is not going to take hold until 24, not only for 24, but also for 25 through 20 some other number that shows the council that we don't want to keep coming back every year and saying, well, that was great. We got 3 firefighter paramedics. Now we're back to where we always were before. Wow. That's not what we need here. To show a longer term vision of what we're trying to accomplish.
So you were actually talking a continuous resolution, not just a referendum for 1 year. This would be a continuous resolution.
Yeah, you probably haven't seen, I probably haven't shared with you guys, but a lot of the referendums say to hire and retain for firefighter paramedics. And so they're ongoing. And it says that you will be levying $530,000 plus 3% a year, whatever, ongoing basis. It's not a one-time thing. I mean, clearly these are not intended to get you through 1 year. They're intended to be something that's going to be in place to fund public safety operations to some degree.
Steve, would you be willing to, I literally know nothing about referendums and how they work and who does them and so on. The city does, it's a city referendum. So the commission would recommend to the council that there be a referendum. The council would agree that there should be a referendum in April. And then there's a process for carrying the referendum out.
Correct. And from a logistical standpoint, what we've been told by our city clerk is that if we're going to have a referendum on the April ballot, which the council seems to be interested in, even though it would be the same time as a school district referendum, but they're going to be very different dollar amounts and for very different purposes. To make that, we would have to make approval of a ballot question, the council would, at its January 10th meeting. That would allow us the nearly 3 months it takes to get on the ballot in April. We have 2 council meetings before then, one on the 13th of December, one on the 20th. My goal is to bring them at both meetings. First of all, on the 13th, here's the discussion, here's what things are being talked about. By the 20th, hopefully be narrowing it down to, here are some sample ballot questions. What do you think of them? And then on the 10th of January, if you're going to do this, vote on a ballot question that you're going to tell the public, we're asking for you to raise this amount, add this much to the levy in order to fund these positions, whatever it says.
Okay, and then a referendum, you know, I think of them like the school one, they want to build stuff. You know, they want money to add to the high school and to do this and to do that.
Right.
That's a one-time thing. They get the money, they build the buildings, and we're done with it. Right?
It is, correct. Although they come back a lot of times, a lot of school districts have for annual operating expense costs. But the one you're talking about, they'll do in April, I think is for facility upgrades largely.
Yeah. And then what we would do is another kind of referendum in that we'd want continuing funding
Correct.
for people, for staff, for, okay.
The council did one that was kind of in between a few years ago. Some of you might remember for streets. It was for the public to consider taxing themselves, so to speak, for 5 years in order to do, I think it was like 9 or 10 major street projects that were laid out.
I remember.
And it would, after 5 years, it would end. And that failed by about a 2-to-1 vote. But this is very different than both of those in the fact it would be an ongoing thing to fund public safety 25, 26, 27, 28.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Steve. I feel like I know what I'm talking about a little better.
So when we come to that point, is it specified that it's a continuing appropriation? And that does it go on the number that are added, or does it go on the total number of, say, firefighter EMTs? Or, you know, that the fire department maintains a certain number of full-time, or is it specifically to add those people and to continue to add those people?
What I've seen has been a dollar amount.
You have to specify a dollar amount.
So 300 grand.
Let's say, yeah, hypothetically, let's say we talked about 3 firefighter paramedics and that was it. And we said 300,000, we probably want to buffer it a little bit. Let's say $325,000 for the hiring and retention of 3 firefighter paramedics. Like I said, I've seen them both ways. I've seen referendums that just say that, but I've seen ones that say to be increased by 3% per year thereafter, to make sure that even if all we do is that there's the funding to continue providing the cost of those, you know.
Because you'd hate to hire 3 and then add at the end of this year or something there, the first year that the city would be in the world of hurt, and then they'd have to cut back on 3 positions. They wouldn't want that to.
The key is sustainability, right?
Right.
To be able to sustain the addition and maintain that staffing level. It's just interpreted in the ballot question in terms of dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, whereas if we were going to a referendum to buy this ambulance for $300,000, that would be, like you said, that'd be a one-time thing. But this is, the intent is for this to be ongoing. And I know you've talked about a SAFER grant, which would, or at least at some level there's been discussion. That would be something that after 3 years, you'd probably be ponying up the money yourself. This is just saying to the public, we want 3 firefighter paramedics or 6 or whatever it is, ongoing, period.
Just a general question. When you talk about these kinds of issues and what you're proposing for the council is the way you do it, you go to the council and say, you know, we've got some alternatives here, a minimum alternative and the one that we think would be best over the long term. But you can't do that in a referendum. You can't put it out to the people and say, oh, well, okay, if you don't like the first one, we'll take the second.
No,
Are you better off going for what you really need, even if the number is high? Or are you better off backing down and, you know, what?
That's a great question, and this goes to the whole idea of how some of these communities have been able to successfully sell their referendums. You need a public campaign. I'll send you the stuff that I sent to the council. Maybe some of you saw it from a previous packet of information on referendums. And one of the things was, I think it was Eau Claire maybe, but some city had a flyer, an FAQ flyer that was just wonderful. It's going to be whatever I think the council feels is appropriate and that is saleable to the public. I mean, if you went and said, hey, we want $5 million and we're going to hire 30 people, we're going to buy 3 ambulances, that's not going to happen. So if you look at, you know, called door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, I think you're going to want to pick the ballot question if this goes to referendum that is most likely to have success. And again, the ballot questions are very specific. This dollar amount to be levied for these purposes. You get one shot at it, one kick at the can.
And once the council says, we support doing a referendum in April, and this is the one we support, who carries out all of the public relations stuff and the questionnaire or the facts, you know, who does all that?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things that I think hurt us back in the day of the street referendum, and maybe I'm wrong, Mike, you were there, Tom, I don't know if you were, how many years ago was that, like maybe 5?
I came on the council right after that failed.
Okay, was the fact that, you know, I don't think there was a great campaign. There were, you know, people talking it up a little bit. Staff was directed not to be part of this. I think we would look self-serving. I'm not sure if that's a legal issue or if that was just something we were told that we should be part of trying to sell it. But there really wasn't the videos and FAQ sheets and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if the public grabbed on to what it would do for them, except the fact that it would raise their taxes and fix some streets. So the only way this is going to work, I think, and I think this is what some other cities have done, I think that's why 17 out of 20 were successful in November, was you've got to be able to sell it. The public has to understand, why would we raise our own taxes? We already don't like paying taxes. Why would we raise them? There's got to be somebody out there doing a campaign.
If I can speak up a little bit, at the wonderful meeting at the league where we thought we were going to come up with a wonderful answer about defense money, and we all realized that there's no easy way. One of the things that some of those organizations did, or those successful places did, was to hire a firm. Now that, of course, has an expense. That would be an option. Otherwise, really, it's everybody in the room right now, everybody sitting at the council, you know, any official has to get the word out, and whether it's town hall meetings, whether it's, you know, media blitz, whatever it would be, it has to be, and this is where I think the trick comes in with identifying what that referendum looks like. It's got to be something everybody's on board with, and everybody then can speak positively for. You get one dissenting voice, or, you know, one dissension to that, and it's just going to kill it.
Yeah.
So it's got to be something everybody can get on board with, everybody can positively back, and then whether or not the city desires to hire a firm to, you know, do the rest of the work, I guess, is kind of something the council has to decide.
Picture yourself initially trying to fill in this phrase. This is needed in order to. This is needed in order to continue the high quality service we have. This is needed in order to assure that we'll have a qualified, well-trained staff of people who want to, you know, work for the Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department. What does that look like? If I'm John Q. Citizen, whether it's a video or an FAQ sheet or whatever, why do I want to do this? And whether it's a firm or whether it's somebody here locally leading the charge, you got to answer that.
Steve, is this the pamphlet you're talking about?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, that's the FAQ sheet. Let's share it, hand it around. Yeah, I thought that was really well done.
Well, you know, I don't think that's hard. We want to do this so that you don't have to wait for an ambulance.
Well, that's a part of it.
I think the point that Tom brought up about there has to be buy-in from, once the council makes a decision to do this, that there not be any dissenting along the way, because like you said, it's going to kill it. And the public will feed on that. If it's a joint effort, all the better for the resolution or the referendum, because the public will see the need more than, any alternate directions to go, so.
Yeah,
We need it, we want it, this is what we gotta do to get it done.
I've heard one of Tom and Mike's peers say to me, and this is a valid thing to say, but it plays into your point, not necessarily in favor of referendum, but believe that the citizens should have the right to decide whether or not they want to go forward with this. So that may not be seen as support for the referendum, but it's certainly seen as support of that the public needs to be confronted with this problem and be able to choose. Hopefully if they vote to do this, there'll be people who are over that hump saying, I think we need to do this.
So at what point is it a binding or an advisory referendum?
No, this would be a binding referendum. We're not feeling people out for their opinion on this one. This is similar to the street one.
Okay.
Do very clearly, do you want to increase your taxes, increase the levy by this amount in order to accomplish these tasks?
Mike, you have a question?
If we have a town hall meeting, I haven't heard the rumble that staff couldn't be involved. Could they be at that meeting and give their opinion? I know it's self-serving. Of course it's self-serving. If we want 4 or 5 firefighters, it's going to be self-serving. But why else are we doing it? So they should be able to answer the technical questions that we can't.
Well, and I think that's a good point, because the same thing came up with a referendum on the station.
I know.
And then they wanted to stifle the chief even, and he's the one with all the information.
Honestly,
that was baloney, really. And but the other side would say, well, yeah, sure you want to talk about it because you got an interest in it. Yeah, that's exactly what it's all about. And just come back with that, because they've got to be involved. They've got to be able to be available for public forums or town hall meetings or whatever, and they've got to be able to lay out the facts for everybody. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it in my mind. So.
Yeah, I brought that up in the meeting with Pete and Steve and Jody and others. And as I said it, I thought to myself, is that a law, or is that just something we were told? It's inappropriate for staff to be part of a campaign for a referendum. I know we were told that very clearly for the street one, that staff was not to be doing anything. And I remember thinking to myself, 90 days are going to go by and people are going to vote, and I don't know, without some staff assistance, if the information is really going to be understood.
And I guess I'd hope we could be there. I mean, we're collecting the data, we have all the data. And I granted, we could probably try and share that, but it's difficult to articulate that unless you're in this field, I guess, as far as staffing and needs.
Steve, did you?
I do have a point. I mean, I think not all the solutions are there, but some of the stories and some of the stuff that will sell this, the people on the ground, on the rig, on the squads, the rank and file have some of that. The stories of, because of this happened. Like we keep bringing up the time where a engine with like 2 guys went to a fire. That kind of stuff. Those are the stories that will sell this. I mean, the rank and file, yeah, they should be involved. I mean, but that's your guys' decision, or we have the conversation. I don't even know who makes that decision, but at some level.
Well, minimally, I think it's important that the department had show support for this.
Yeah.
Neither Pete nor I want to approach the citizens to ask for more money. But we're at the point now where the services are going to be effective, quite honestly.
And we get safety issues.
I think that you make a good point, though.
Steve?
I'm sorry.
I just want to follow up.
Oh, yeah.
That's Steve.
I'm sorry
so much.
Now, I've been involved with 2 referendums, one for the station, a rather large school referendum, and I guess indirectly, everybody was indirectly involved with street referendum. Street referendum really had poor PR. It was tossed out, there it was. no good groundwork. The fire station referendum, for any of us that were around at that time, that was a mess. And you talk to people, especially some people that were on the commission at that time, they'll tell you, we really failed. We never got the message out. The school district referendum that I was involved with, every staff member in an affected area had an open house, and every staff member showed the people what was wrong, what needed to be corrected. And I know when I had people come into the chemistry and physics laboratory over in Neilsville, and they could say, oh, I carved those initials when I was here in 1965. They were still on the desk. That tended to make some kind of impression on people. Say, had it been replaced in that long? We have to have people, like Steve says, showing the things. I keep referring to Chief Bartek over in Wausau as some positive examples of things he does. He had a situation where purely by chance, one of the people from the city of Wausau who does their video work was in a squad car. At the same time, there was a fire call. So he pulled up, the squad pulled up, and the guy who was doing the video showed an engine come up with 2 guys. So you've got one guy working the pump and the other guy trying to put water on it from the tank, waiting for an ambulance to swing in with their crew to hook up to the hydrant. It made a big impression. And I think this goes right along with what Steve's saying. The other point, take a look at everybody that's here. How many of us are good at PR? How many of us are good at fundraising? How many of us are good at selling something as big as this? We need professional guidance. Now, whether that's somebody who puts together literature, door hangers, videos, whatever, or if they can guide us into that realm, we can't do this alone.
Is it possible?
I worry that if we do this alone, we're going to come close and maybe not at all.
Were you gonna?
Yeah, I was going to kind of play off what Steve said, but now I'm kind of focusing more on what Bill just said. I think, but I'm going to go back to what Steve said. I think telling the stories is probably the most important thing. And you know, I'm persuaded every time I talk to Steve and Pete, to one of the key things is burnout. You know, people are going to get worn out, they're going to get burned out. I'm not sure if the public grabs onto that as much as they grab onto the stories that you're talking about, which is whether it's response time, whether it's the number of people who show up on a scene, whether they're even available to respond because they're tied up on another call. Any way we can show that that's more of a direct impact on their lives. They can picture their mom or their mother-in-law needing help and us not being able to get there as fast or with the right people. That probably will be a better sales point for us.
Two parts of the same issue in my head. People my age, and there are still a few of us, I don't think the argument about burnout is very compelling for people my age. We all think we worked very hard. We all think we had tough times. We all think that we had to raise our families in sometimes dire circumstances. And to tell me that things are tough and that you're burned out, I'm not real sympathetic. I just am not. I think you're right, though, to talk about somebody having to wait for an ambulance or for there to be a fire and not enough people to effectively fight it and all of that. I think that's important. And I'll give a quick example. I rode with Jake a couple of weeks ago. And it was amazing to me. First of all, he saw things I didn't see, little things. But we would go past a house and a car would come out of the driveway. He would know the house, he would know the car, he would know the person driving it. The amount of knowledge that he had about the circumstances of his work were extraordinary. If everyone could ride with Jake, it'd make a big difference. And that's the one thing. The other thing is getting the story out. I don't know how you do that anymore. But if you do what I think would have to be done, you'd need one person organizing it all. You're gonna go to Kiwanis, you're gonna go to the church meeting, you're gonna go to, someone has to be organizing it. It used to be that if you could get the right attitude out of the News Herald, you could basically touch almost everybody in town, and that doesn't work anymore. That's the only thing I can think you can do is talk to people one-on-one, and maybe that's going into Browns and you know, I once had a school superintendent in a place where I taught. He had, you know, a slide projector. He would literally go into bars and do a slide presentation. And he went all over town. Did it for a full year. And he got a ton of money out of a referendum by doing that. Somehow we have to find a way to get the story out, and that's hard to do. And I don't know enough about social media to even have a sense of how you could harness that to make.
And for better or worse, if we go down the road we're talking right now, if the council really does want to authorize this for the spring election, you're going to be going head to head. We're going to be going head to head as a group with the school district referendum. And I realize the dollars are different between 90 million and whatever this number is, but you know they're going to do a strong public campaign, and they're going to get people really enthusiastic, or try to, about this is for the future of our education. So, you know, whatever we do has got to be compelling as well.
The superintendent of schools, there were 3 of us around the table, and he talked through his campaign. And I think that they intend to use teachers and students as major parts of the selling campaign. They're not hesitating one bit, if I understood them correctly, to use all of the assets that are related to the school system to sell the referendum, which I think that's great.
I was in the same class as Alderperson Whistle at the league. It seemed like they both used the same company. It was Fort Atkinson and Fond du Lac, I believe.
Yeah, Pleasant Prairie.
And they maybe it was Pleasant Prairie. I don't remember, but both of them said this was immensely helpful.
It's a good piece.
Are we supposed to today just discuss it, or are we supposed to come out of this meeting as a commission supporting the idea of a referendum in April, including the fire and police departments, to the Common Council?
Is this your one and only meeting of December, or do you have a regular meeting coming up afterwards?
Next week.
Okay. I think, I'm going to leave in 5 to 10 minutes because I got a 1 o'clock meeting, but I think what I'd like to see out of this body, whether it's now or at your regular meeting, is a sense of what you would like to see possible ballot questions based upon what we're talking about. I'm glad to hear what the 2 chiefs came up with as far as possibility looking at an office position, which otherwise would be difficult, and that's public safety related. But my only thought would be 2 or 3 options and be able to articulate what you feel about them and why they'd be good. Because I think that's what it's going to come down to. This is going to ultimately come down to a balancing act between what is necessary to move us forward and what we think we can sell in an effective way with a campaign that says, this is why we need this. And just give it your best shot. Tell us what you think. As a committee, using these experts here that we've got great public safety personnel, here's what we think. 2 ballot questions, one says this, one says this, we prefer this one, here's why. Council, have at it. This one meets the basics, this one takes us farther.
Thank you. I'm here because I'm the chair of the Finance Budget Personnel Committee. I'm also here because that's the primary reason why I'm here today. It seemed pretty clear from the council, and Mike can weigh in on this too if he wishes, but it seemed pretty clear from the council that we really wanted you guys to meet earlier than you had planned, which is why you're here today, to get a feel for what your thoughts are. We don't manage their departments. We provide the monies that you need to manage their departments. We as a council need to know, what do you need? What is the absolute base that you need? The tiers, just like Steve said. This absolutely we need, or we're gonna have big, big problems. This gives us a little bit more breathing room for the next 5, 10 years. This would be great. Just give us some ideas so that we know what you, as the management group of them, feel is really, really important. Get us that information, and then we can take that information and figure out what we think we can sell to the public. I agree with you. I don't think people care about burnout. I think people care about themselves. People are gonna hear, it may take longer for that ambulance to show up at your house. People are gonna listen to 2 people maybe fighting your fire for the first 15, 20 minutes until more people can get called in. If people can even be called in. That's what people are gonna listen to. People aren't gonna listen to, I feel bad for them. The people are gonna listen to, I'm worried about myself. And that's the society we live in, like it or not, that's where we're at. So whatever message we sell and whatever we're doing and looking to improve has to be what the public can understand that they personally need for their own livelihood. And what we want from as a council, what we want from you then is what you see that need is.
Okay. Mike?
Well, go ahead.
Okay. I want to go back to something I said at the last council meeting. The council has legislative and financial obligations. There are 3 things we can't do. We can't buy land, we can't construct buildings, we can't levy taxes. That's the council's end. So now comes down to the question, who is going to be in charge of the referendum? Is it finance, budget, personnel? Is it the entire common council? Who is going to then give out the information? We can give out information. There's no problem. I mean, these guys can come in with notebooks full of information. We can come in with large volume of stories. And I agree very much with Tom's perspective. If it's going to take longer to get the fire department there, that's not good. Longer for the ambulance, that's not good. That's easy to understand. But from my point of view, who is going to be in command? Who is going to run this? And as I mentioned, little acronym, FLOP, FLOP. Who's going to control the finances of this operation? Who deals with the logistics? Who deals with the operating PR? Who deals with the planning? Who is our public relations expert? That has to be decided. We certainly can make a recommendation, perhaps, of our options, and perhaps later we decide on some sort of command structure. But that we have to know. The other thing, and this, Tom and Mike have heard me say this countless times about the city's communication. You have to use the full media spectrum. Now, I'll exclude the News Herald as Andy does, because I mean, their big news about Marshfield is sports and the restaurant inspection. I mean, other than that, what do we find out? But we still have to use the full media spectrum. I've had people tell me, oh, use Facebook and Twitter. That's all you gotta do. No, you gotta have your feet on the ground. You gotta be knocking on doors, shaking hands, and that sort of thing. So that's, where does that go? I think that leads us to some sort of consultant, some sort of professional advice. The least we can get is advice. We may not hire a consultant for the full program, maybe we do, but we need professional advice.
There's a couple questions that come to mind with that. If our recommendation would be that the city conduct a referendum, is the city prepared to pay for a consultant? Are there other funds available to do that? That's one question. And the other question would be, we've talked strictly about 3 additional personnel or whatever we come up with, 6. What would be the deadline that the council would have to know this? Because our next commission meeting, I believe, is the 15th.
Yeah, I'm thinking if you can give me something by the 20th, the second council meeting of the month, which moved up by a week because of the Christmas holiday. If you can give me something that I can run with on the 20th. What I'm gonna do on the 13th is really kind of walk through some of the discussion we've had to date about different levels of service, which I think, by the way, Tom did an outstanding job of walking through very briefly there as far as like, tiers, and you guys tell us what you need, whether it's for now, whether it's 5 years out, give us some idea what those tiers would accomplish. But the 20th would be fine, so your meeting on the 15th will be good. I gotta take off, I apologize, I had another meeting scheduled. I also apologize if I talk too much, it's left to myself, I tend to do that. But any follow-up questions, I can hear from Jennifer, and you know where to find me.
I do have one more question before you leave.
Yes.
We've talked strictly about 3 or 6 or 9 additional personnel or whatever might be needed, but there's also been discussions amongst people to provide an alternative to that money question. And there's the question hanging out there, is it time to consider, and maybe we muddy the waters by even talking about this, but the time to consider a public safety tax.
Yeah.
One or the other, with a referendum, either we do this or this, and then we could get, it's another whole gamut to go with the tax.
That idea is in the hands of the city attorney, and I'll follow up with him in the next day or two and see if he's had a chance to investigate. It's not something he was familiar with initially, but he's got all the information, and I'll find out hopefully in the next couple of days what he thinks about that. That's unrelated but related. You're right, because we wouldn't do both. I assume we would if we got that in place and that would fund a lot of what we're talking about, if not all of what we're talking about. We probably wouldn't do both. But right now we're going to pursue the referendum discussion full tilt for the moment.
Should the referendum pass, and then it's deemed that the more appropriate route would be the tax, just because you have an approval for an amount to levy, you are not required to levy to that approval. So what would happen is, if you were approved for $500,000, but we decided instead to do the tax, then that $500,000 would remain unlevied.
Okay.
Just looking for authority.
Steve, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks. Any follow-up questions? I'll hear from Jennifer, or let you guys know where to find me.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So over, let's say, a 3 to 5, 10-year time frame that this can go into play potentially, is 3% increase to that budget annually adequate? That's a real intangible, an unknown.
But when you're talking about specifics, right, for headcount, those increases are determined by your contract. So it's really a hedge against what actually happens in terms of the contract for negotiated rates. Now, if we said in a levy that we were only going to do a 2% increase, could you hold your union contract to 2%? I don't, so that's, you may come up, there may come a time where you have to look for other sources of, a budget cut because your union contract went above what we anticipated in the levy.
So I can understand it. I'm just going to go back to a question I asked before. If this were to say we had a referendum and were to pass for an additional $300,000 for 3 additional people in the department, then it's not, we cannot be subject in the future to any problems that the city is having financially. They can't say, well, don't fill those 3 positions, and then I'm just to get clarification on that. Once it passes a referendum, it's good for
that purpose.
And it can't be sacrificed at some point down the road for. I'll
have to weigh in on for certain, but that would be my preliminary.
Unfortunately, you could find yourself in dire straits again next year, and then with the city budget, and then, what's always the first thing to go is a bigger ticket item. And so we got it for 1 year, but now we're not gonna have it the next year. And for continuity's sake, and for planning's sake, and for the individuals who are hired, with the impression that, well, you're good forever, or you're good for at least another year in your new position.
Well, I think it's important to say, when the police budget was cut 125,
Final one.
That, we didn't, that was not designated as staff cuts, that was, right?
Oh, I know.
Right, so, trying to keep that into perspective, we didn't say what, I mean, that would mean that there's, outside of your staff, of that discretionary level that had to have been cut, right? We're designated, if you were to include those items in the levy, that we're just trying to get back to baseline with our staff and our other discretionary expenditures, if that makes sense.
If I understand correctly, this referendum is essentially asking citizens to increase the size of the levy.
Right.
And that's a permanent increase.
We would be structuring it to be a permanent increase.
Yeah.
So right now, the base levy is about $10.8 million. We would be saying, if it's 200,000, our base is 11 million.
Yeah.
We still have, the only way that number outside of this referendum increases is net new construction. So if we have a year with 0 net new construction, our base would still be that new $11 million. If we have net new construction, that's the only increase we get.
Yeah.
Is in current levy limit laws.
Yeah.
So unless those change.
Does the reval that you're gonna do figure into that at all?
No, what a reval does, so that $10.8 million is currently distributed amongst all of the property owners. With a reval, the amounts of the valuation shuffle. Right, some go up, some go down. So we're still only allowed, in our example, the $11 million. It's just which property owner is paying how much of that is what changes. Doesn't give us more money, it shuffles who pays.
I can't resist this, Tom. In 1964 or 5, I was taken to New York City, Midtown Manhattan, to IBM's sales school. And what you described, IBM in 1960-something called benefit sell. People only buy what they perceive will benefit them. It was a nice summary.
I have to sneak out. I have to get back to my normal job.
Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you could be here.
Cool.
Thanks for your continued support, Tom.
I got a question. And this is more geared toward the fire department. If a referendum passed where they would hire 9 firefighter paramedics, do it as an incremental thing, get the 3 that we need right now, and over the next 2 years beyond that, hire an additional 3 people, so it's more palatable to the public versus this huge increase in property taxes all up front. That might be something to consider as well, I think.
It's all how you word that ballot. You can say I want 500,000 in 2024, and then I want $1 million in 2025, and $1 million, plus CPI each year thereafter. As long as you're going, however you word that ballot, wherever you think you will get your resources.
Yeah. And that's what you pay the lawyer for.
And to me, that makes maybe more sense because you're filling the need that you have right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're planning for the future, that you're gonna need another 3, or maybe should have the other 3, but people are gonna swallow this a whole lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that 3rd year option, you get the additional 3 to build up to 9. Likewise, looking at the police department, I believe my understanding was that 1 retirement of an officer comes next year, plus secretarial staff. You're looking at replacing both of those people because that's completely necessary. And then potentially looking at a half of employment of another secretarial staff. How about potentially looking at, if we're looking at 3, 5, 10 years down the road, I don't think the department's grown except by 1 person since the early 90s. And nobody knows what things are gonna happen between.
There's actually been 2 added.
Nobody knows what's gonna happen in the next 5 to 10 years, but would we potentially be better to looking at adding 3 more personnel potentially. Maybe not next year, maybe not 3 years from now, but in 5 years as part of this referendum, so that we're forward thinking for the department, as that department as well.
My biggest concern is that if we look at adding too much, I think it becomes less palatable to people. What we're looking at is to fill a deficit. And that's my thought. But.
I don't think people think of it that way.
Okay.
And I don't think that's going to be something, a lever that's going to sell anything. Can you ask citizens to obligate themselves 3 years in the future?
In the referendum?
School does it all the time, they say for 5 years.
Yeah. Many of the referendums that were on the ballots in 2022 extended, they capped it specific dollars in X year, year plus 1, year plus 2, and then it fell off. Or some were this year and each year going forward. So it's all in what you define as your need, and then you put your need on the ballot.
What I'm hearing is we're talking about a referendum that would increase revenue in perpetuity. And we can do that by saying we want $100 in the first year, $130 in the second, $150 in the third, continuing forever.
That's how they have been worded.
Okay, thank you.
So the earliest this can take effect is 2024. It can't pass in April and start in July.
No, because the process for levying taxes happens right now in December. And so the taxes are levied currently for 2024. Those are in process.
Okay.
So you get 9 months, 8 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions or otherwise? I think what we're headed towards doing is having everybody do some homework between now and our next meeting, and have this as a point on our next meeting agenda to come up with a specific want list from the council as far as in regards to the referendum. There's some fine points. Gonna take a lot from the two chiefs to make that recommendation, because they know more than we do as far as what they absolutely need and what the future holds for them. But at the same time, we might have some ideas too that we can interject and have that part of the discussion at the December 15th meeting. I was looking at this meeting as being an opportunity to sit with some of the council members and with city staff, finance, and the administrator, and to toss some ideas around. I think we did that. We'll probably get our minutes to the council as soon as we can, so they have a little insight into where we're headed. But Mike.
Steve has a point, and the 10 of us can be a problem, if you know what I mean. You got to get everybody on the same page. We don't need one of us or two of us saying, I don't really like referendums, because that automatically is a negative. We have to make sure, and he did allude to that, we have to make sure that all 10 of us say that we're behind this, and don't say, I don't really like referendums. Because then that's going to turn off at least 20% of the people. Say, well, if he doesn't like it, then why should I like it? And some of these people, and you're not going to point any fingers, but they like to showboat, and that showboat's not what we need. If you're going to showboat, say, this is the best for the city and let's go for it. And I support it, not say, I don't really like referendums, but wrong statement to make. And they do make those all the time.
Mike, how do we do that?
Well, maybe a 2x4?
It's a build a bridge.
Same thing, yeah. I'm telling you.
Building bridges.
Build a bridge. You have to etch that in the head, because that's a problem. I've been dealing with this for quite a few years, and that you can see they can kill, one or two people can kill something just by making a statement like that. That's where they draw everybody else into their way of thinking, so.
Fortunately, I think through the discussions through the budget, all 7 or 8 meetings, whatever it was, that there appears to be support for the needs in the fire department, especially, and then of course, police department. But I think that a referendum would actually, once it's organized and conducted, that it actually takes the monkey off the council's back, because the citizens are saying, this is what we want. So it isn't anything that anybody's gonna win their next election or lose their next election on or anything like that to hesitate supporting it. The city residents are actually saying, this is what we want. It's not the council making that decision. So it takes the monkey off of your back.
The other thing we have to, and it's always, you got, when you put something together, you have to, you don't want to talk the tax as much as what they're getting for that tax. $50,000 is $50,000, but what is your life worth? Make it worth, make them knowing that these personnel that are going to be added are going to save your life, not save your pocketbook. Because your pocketbook is, money can go like that. If you got money invested in anything, just let the government get a hold of it, and you lose half of it just that fast. So the money's not the issue. It's what you're going to get for your dollar.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to sell.
Well, I think that's where the department comes in. I would strongly urge every member of the department, the departments, to get involved with this at some point if that opportunity arises for them, because they shouldn't hesitate for the sake of their interest in it. It should be because they have the stories to tell. I think those stories are going to add up to a lot of feel coming up back from the community that, maybe they don't realize the hurt we're in. Maybe they didn't follow the budget. Maybe they don't know, they don't have a clue what we're up against. But if this is circulating on the community for the next 4 months, 3 months, and then it comes to having to vote on it, hopefully everybody that's available can make that input and those comments and life experiences from their point of view. And again, it probably isn't so much the overtime and everything else working, but it's the idea of somebody pulling up to your house with just 2 people on the truck. Like I said, the video probably did more to sell the idea than anything else. It's pictures and words and whatever we can provide to make people aware that we actually do have a problem. We need to take care of it.
People didn't become firemen and policemen, police officers, firefighters, because they wanted to sell things door to door. I understand that. I didn't want to be I thought being a professor would be a contemplative life, and I could get paid for reading books. Turned out to be a little different than that. But every firefighter and every police officer is going to have to become an advocate with their families, with their neighbors, with their friends, with the people they bowl with. They're going to have to force themselves to step up and sell it. It just has to be that way. If everyone who's involved doesn't say this is important, we really believe in this is important to you, and offer examples of why it is, I don't think we've got a chance.
We've got a lot of stuff ready that Pete put together. It's on the December 5th memo. I appreciate that.
Are you looking for anything different than that for the 15th? I mean,
not in particular, unless it relates to something that we discussed today. I mean, I think the question remains out there. Well, we're going to have to zoom in on: do we recommend 3? Do we recommend 6? Do we recommend 9?
right.
Do we recommend the individuals at the police department? Those things we have to zero in on from the information that we have, or that I imagine you'll be providing on a regular basis for us as it comes up. The Eau Claire thing, we can take that into consideration. What do we want to do? How extensive do we want to use a consultant? What did Eau Claire use? If they used a consultant or Fond du Lac or Fort Atkinson, did they have the opportunity to just have them as a consultant, or did they do the footwork? And some costs involved with that. I'm sure the council's going to want questions answered on that. you know, if we do get a consultant, how much it would cost, so. Those are things that we can answer between now and December 15th, if that information becomes available, so.
Yeah, I know Fond du Lac, Fort Atkinson, Eau Claire all used a marketing agency, and I believe it was the exact same one.
Okay.
All three passed, so I can find out who that was.
And what a typical campaign involves, because the council's gonna wanna know how much it's gonna cost.
Like you said.
Is there anybody who, you know, extra work? Who could begin collecting, I'm not talking about 100 and 200 examples, but a few brief, I'm talking 2 paragraphs, 3 at the most, examples of a truck arriving at a fire with 2 people on it. Stories that can be told, and who publishes the Hub City Times?
Chris Leonard and Mike Warren.
Again, I don't know how Mike might be interested. Up at the university, we had reason to hire a communications person, a new one, someone who, we had one and then we had to hire somebody new. And we hired a person, and I'll share her name. Her name was Melissa Lake. I don't know if any of you knew Melissa. Melissa is an absolutely, she's amazing. We were never in the paper, and all of a sudden we're in the paper 3 and 4 times a week. Well, she wrote the story. She had worked for every news outlet in central Wisconsin in her day. She knew exactly how to give them a copy that was print-ready copy. She wrote all the stories. She gave them ideas about other things they could do. For her time as communications up on the campus, we were in the paper all the time. If we could find somebody who had an interest in just, she saw it as a game. She saw it as a you know, playing volleyball. Every story in the paper was a win, you know, that was great. Somehow or another, I'm really concerned that we don't have the tools we need to make the case that would sell this to the citizens who have to vote yes.
I'm guessing that any consulting firm, like the ones we talked about, Fond du Lac, Fort Atkinson, are familiar with how much media resources have changed. I mean, you're right, they used to be able to go to Tom Berger and say, Tom, look, this is an idea that we have and we'd like this to happen, can you do something about it? And he would, it'd be either a reporter assigned to it, or it'd be an editorial, and people read the News Herald every day. I honestly can say I haven't looked at it in 2 years probably, because there's nothing there, it's not local anymore. But it has gone to media where the city has its own media expert, and you know, that they're doing video and they're doing online stuff, and so I mean that's how things have changed. But I would look for a lot to come out of one of these firms would come, and if it would need be, if one of them wants somebody from the consultant would want to come and talk to us or provide us with some information we can use on the 15th so we can recommend it, knowing what we're talking about when we recommend it to the council. That we looked at consultants, we recommend a consultant, the consultant usually runs this much, and these are the options that they can do for us. But I'd like to be able to go into the council prepared to do that. And, because I think we're headed that way. I don't see any dissension on the part of the commission on that matter. It's outside of our, none of us are we're not experts at it. So,
I just have 2 comments. The first thing is time. So if you want to prioritize, you know, the referendum or figuring out stories or consultants, the clerk has a defined timeline, and January 10th is the drop dead in order for the clerk to meet the subsequent timeline. So I want to just make sure that that's very clear, that by the 15th, you really need to have narrowed down exactly what your referendum should be, because it will have to go to council on the 10th, and from there, that timeline is established. Publication requirements and et cetera. And if you need that timeline, Jessica could probably send it to you. But that's, if you miss those, then you're off the ballot for April. And then if you were talking about costs, I just would remind you that a consultant would be an unanticipated budget expense. So if there isn't room in a current budget, it would require a 2/3, if you wanted to take that as a resolution, the Common Council, it would require a 2/3 vote to allocate additional money outside of the established budget for that, just so that you're aware of.
So you're talking 7-3 on a vote.
2/3.
It's gotta be 7-3, not 6-10, or not 6-4.
6-4, I thought would be the
No,
vote.
that's not 2/3, it'd be 7-3.
7-3. So it's
This
7.
fits into Mike's concern.
Exactly. So just keep that in mind when you're talking about bringing forth, should you need a budget resolution for that.
I have a question for you, Jennifer. So if we we need 6 firefighters, 25 cops. If we come to you with that number.
Wow, Jody.
We gotta buy cars.
I'm assuming you bring your own.
And they gotta be cross-trained.
Right. I think that, as a to-do, we will cost out options
Okay.
for 3,
So our primary is figuring out
9,
personnel. Okay.
1 sworn police officer,
And one support,
and 1
record specialist.
specialist.
I
So
took a
we can
stab.
cost that out.
Well, record specialist is about 70. Initial officer at the starting rate right now of the contract is about 95. Jordan did that for me, enough to us.
So we would want to have you some, solid numbers for you based on your latest contracts.
You can use that memo to.
Yes, I think we have enough data to at least cost it out.
When you said 95, what does that include?
That's wage and benefits.
That's total compensation.
The only thing it doesn't include, which comes out of our operating, is like the $800 we take out to start with the uniform stuff and.
Yeah, okay.
Mike, you had a question?
I don't think there's gonna be a problem with getting the money to get a consultant. I think that the council is bought into this program. We're gonna go to referendum, and you just gotta tell them we have to have a consultant. And we'll get the money.
I just didn't want you to be surprised that it would be a budget.
We'll make sure that everybody's on board.
Well, we'll make sure we have as close to the actual figure that you need to.
It's too late to back off now. They didn't wanna go till 24, so if we're gonna do it, we gotta do it now.
I can certainly reach out to my resources too and figure out who Fond du Lac used. I know who to talk to regarding that.
Okay. All right.
I will say, and I'm the longest serving, I think, at this point on the commission. This meeting is really extraordinary. We have all of the players sitting together at the same time, talking about something that they basically support is just amazing to me. It feels wonderful.
Should we have some kind of operating group that can meet more frequently, composed of staff, somebody from commission, somebody from council, something.
Come on.
I'm not nominating, you're just having to be the only councilman sitting here, so, that way they can get more concrete work done on it.
I'd like to approach the mayor on that, and see if she can appoint a group. And I think we had 2 from the council who are very interested. Mike's expressed his interest in it to me. Tom has publicly expressed it through the budget process, so I think that's two people that can get involved, then we get one or two people from the commission involved, you know, that can do the footwork leading up to the referendum, of course, working with the chiefs and finance, because we need the numbers from finance, so. That would be a recommendation I make, and I could get back to you on the 15th on that too, or if she figures it's not, I mean, it seems to me to be the only way to go.
Yeah, because that way you can have conversations with all the players and work quicker and not have to wait, oh, we're gonna wait a whole other day because we have to set in, you know.
Yeah.
She would like that.
Yeah.
So,
She would be here today if she wasn't committed. She said it was on Tuesday she could be here, but Monday worked out, so we're all here. She's very interested in where we're headed with all this. The mayor, so, Madam Mayor. Unless anybody has any objections to what I suggested by having everything come together on the 15th, then, well, that's the throw I'd like to take if it's up to everybody else. I don't think we need to make a motion on anything. Just let that there in case we came up with some.
individual homework you need us to do in your meeting time here?
Well, to cover this, I mean, that's gonna have a lot of information on it, highlights and stuff that is important to you that we can discuss again on the 15th. Communicate with the chiefs as much as they need to. And, so we can come in on the 15th and ready to prepare.
I always recommend, like I said, my statement before, talking to the rank and file to get the stories.
Yeah.
So if you guys have time to go see the shifts, and don't have it to rotate to the shifts is not a bad practice, so that's just my 2 cents, so.
You guys comfortable with that? Chief? Okay. All right, is there any other discussion? See no objections, we're adjourned.
I can't drive yet. I don't have a car. I need a ride home.